Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Rogue Reads, which is a monthly Zoom event hosted by the Rogue Women Writers. We're a group of, I think I can say it, no FAA or FCC regulations apply. We're a group of kick-ass thriller writers spanning many different subgenres throughout the genre. And every month we welcome some of the literally world's best-selling blockbuster authors with exciting new releases to talk about their books, introduce our listeners to new reads, and the business in general. So welcome. Tonight, I am thrilled to be hosting four authors, Sujata Massey, Richard Armitage, Karen Rose, and Lisa Black. And I'm going to introduce each of these authors, and then we're going to kind of go down the line and ask each of them to tell us about their new release, which I will have given just a nutshell about because we really want to hear the authors talk about their releases. And then I have some questions for each author, and I really encourage the authors to talk to each other. You know, every now and then Rogue Reads kind of gets into this sort of author with author chat, and it's always the most fascinating part of the show. After that, each author, if they are so inclined, will read a short excerpt from their new novel. And then we are hopefully going to have some time for Q&A from the audience. So again, welcome to Rogue Reads. And let me first introduce Sujata Massey. She writes mystery and suspense fiction set in pre-independence India, as well as a modern mystery series set in Japan. And her novels have won this is going to take me a while, Agatha, Lefty, McCavity, and Mary Higgins Clark prizes, and were finalists for the Edgar, the Anthony, and the Harper Lee Literary Awards. Sujata earned a BA in writing seminars at Johns Hopkins and wrote features for the Baltimore Sun before becoming a novelist. And her current novel, The Mistress of Bhatia House, is set in India in 1922. Praveen Mistry is the only female lawyer in Bombay, a city where child mortality is high, birth control is unavailable, and very few women have ever seen a doctor. The grandson of an influential businessman catches fire, and his young Aya, Sanandra, rushes to save him, but she's later arrested on trumped-up charges. Praveen takes Sunanda on as a client, but the case spirals into a complex investigation when a second fire erupts. Sujata, welcome, and would you please tell us about this latest installment in your series?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jenny, and to all the Rogue Women writers and all the regular participants. It's really exciting to go into a Zoom room where you think you don't know anybody, and there are all these people that are waiting to talk and listen to each other. So that's really nice. This book, The Mistress of Bhatia House, is the fourth installment in my Praveen mystery series. It does not have to be read in order, but a lot of people do like to read in order, and I certainly, encourage people to do that if they want. And I came to this book because I was really interested in what was the situation like for women in the 1920s if they had an unwanted pregnancy. What did they do? Was there birth control? What was the situation with hospitals? I knew that a lot of women were being married at ages like 10 and 11, including people in my own family tree, which is from Bengal, a different part of India. This is set in Western India where Bombay is located, now Mumbai. So I was very interested in that idea. And another interesting thing for me was that my late grandmother was involved in starting a maternity hospital. And this is a project that she started in a slum neighborhood. And she and other women volunteers from the Gujarati community. Gujarat is a state in India, and it's traditionally been a place where there were a lot of people who are really good at business. And so they tend to go all over the cities in India and have these strong business communities. So these women who can't work because of, social constraints, they get involved in starting trying to fund a maternity hospital where they don't actually have their own money. So they have to persuade the men in their lives to give them money, or, get it by these different means. And that's another element of the book. And then there's also the story of Perveen and her family. She's a 22-year-old woman lawyer, but yes, it is 1921. And she does not have, there's no agency. You can't rent an apartment by yourself when you're a woman in this day and age. You live with your family for a long time. And so she has to get along with her family, and in her family, her sister-in-law has just had her first child. And that sets up a lot of fireworks between Perveen, who doesn't have children and she's in an awkward situation where she may never live with a husband or have a child. And how do you feel when a baby comes into your house?
Thank you. I kept thinking as I was reading La Plus Ça Change, and that yes, we were reading about 1922, but could we be reading about 2022, 3022? It's wonderful for all of those elements. We're going to move on down the line, but I have to say, I'm going to try to hold this steady, that Sujata's favorite drink coming out of the book, as well as, I don't know, maybe life as well, as a chai. And then we also got introduced to these wonderful little cookies. You too can order them on Amazon. They are chocolate covered biscuits. I'm pretty sure that mine melted together in the package, and that's why I have 3, but I'm just calling it, that's what they're like. No, it's a triple decker.
It's a club sandwich.
It's a club sandwich cookie, exactly. Okay, so we're going to move on down the line, and then I have some questions that I'd love to get into. We're going to welcome Richard Armitage to Rogue Reads tonight. Richard is a multi-award-winning stage, screen, and voice actor, best known for his roles in Peter Jackson's trilogy of The Hobbit, Captain America, The First Avenger, my kids should really be here tonight, Alice Through the Looking Glass, Ocean's 8, The Best Oceans, and the recent Netflix series, The Stranger, also I'm going to say Obsession from Netflix as well. Geneva is his first novel. Richard lives in London and New York City. So welcome, Richard. Is this wouldn't be, and the book isn't even out yet. I think it's coming out October 10th. Am I correct?
It comes out in October 12th in the UK, and I think it's slightly later in the US. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not even
I feel like
out
a
yet.
male imposter in this session today. I've snuck in through the back door.
No, not at all. What I was going to say is, are we lucky enough to be one of your very first author events?
I've done a few, but the main book tour kicks off in about 2 weeks. Yeah, but
Very
it's the
exciting.
first online one I've done.
Okay, exciting, thrilling. I'm going to read about Richard's first novel, Geneva, and then ask him to tell us about it. A Nobel Prize winning scientist has started to show the same telltale signs of Alzheimer's disease that her father is experiencing: memory loss, even blackouts. So she's reluctant to be the guest of honor at a prestigious biotech conference until her husband, also a neuroscientist, persuades her to go. The technology being unveiled at this conference could revolutionize medicine forever. More than that, it could save Sarah's life. Richard. Well, first of all, thank you, Richard, for the old-fashioned. That's the recommendation I got from Richard. Yeah, no, I think I'll take a sip. Right on screen. Tell us about Geneva.
So Geneva came about because the company that I do a lot of recording for, Audible, had figured out that a lot of crime thriller was doing very well for them, particularly when I read it. And it was the type of work that I'd been doing as an actor. And they actually asked me if I'd like to write something for me to read. And of course, I leapt at the chance. And then the next thing they said to me was, do you want a ghostwriter? And I said, absolutely not. If I'm going to read this with my own voice, I will write every single word of the book. And then they got really scared and said, can you present us with some writing samples and some story ideas and a full breakdown of the story, which I started to do. It was just as we were entering the pandemic. I was on stage doing Uncle Vanya at the time, and I was watching a lot of footage of Sarah Gilbert, who was one of the pioneering virologists who developed the AstraZeneca vaccine, and I was looking into actually developing the life rights to tell her story as a TV show. But I thought I would use somebody of her intense intelligence as the basis for a character that we would put through a stress test by throwing her at the center of a crime where she is forced to doubt her own mind in a situation where she's being gaslit by her husband, and she believes she has Alzheimer's when that is not the case. And so I sort of investigated all of the things that I love about crime drama, the Alfred Hitchcock style, David Fincher, Orson Welles. I'm really interested in science fiction that's close enough to be science fact. So I looked a little bit at what Elon Musk was doing with his Neuralink, and sort of chose to call mine Neuracell, because I think some of the some friends that I have whose parents were suffering from Alzheimer's were doing kind of endless research into what was on the horizon in terms of breakthrough drugs or breakthrough technology. And so I just poured all of those things that I'm fascinated into a crime drama set in one of the most spectacular locations I could think of, the mountains of the Alps around Geneva, because it's a place where a lot of biotech institutes set up, and it's a really interesting place. I visited there a lot, so it was part destination thriller, part sort of James Bond-esque crime.
That's a fascinating origin story. I think all the emerging writers out there, and we usually have a lot in our audience, must be very intrigued by Audible coming to you and then sort of getting scared. And is it a little bit like having to read for an audition? Like they wanted to make sure you could write.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I guess it was a bit of an experiment on everybody's part, myself included, because I'd written for characters. Whenever I've created a character for screen, I write a lot of biography, and there's sort of a storage container full of all my books, and I usually write in first person. So I knew I could write. It was often free flow and never for anybody else to read. So I did have to sort of think, well, what is your style going to be? What's your voice? What's your signature? But I did want to put a woman at the center of the story, because and that was something that Audible were nervous about, because they were obviously wanting, my voice to be featured, but I was just interested in this one particular woman of extraordinary intelligence. So that was another equation that they were they found hard to get their head around.
Yeah, I bet. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the female characters threading throughout all the author's releases. But let me introduce Karen Rose next. Internationally best-selling and Rita Award-winning author, Karen's debut novel, Don't Tell, was released back in 2003. And since then, she has published more than 25 novels and 2 novellas. Her books have appeared on the New York Times, USA Today, London Sunday Times bestseller list, hit #1 in Germany and in South Africa, and multiple other international locations. A former high school teacher, Karen lives in Florida. And Beneath Dark Waters has this log line, which I'm just going to share because it's so great. There's no safe place for a child to hide when danger comes from every direction. Public prosecutor J.P. Kai Cardozo's son becomes the target of a kidnapping attempt, and veteran Marine Val Sorensen's latest assignment is to guard 10-year-old Elijah. But when the high-stakes investigation reveals an explosive network of crime through a revived drug gang, lingering deep-seated corruption in the NOPD, and a group of murderers for hire targeting Kai, Elijah, and his star client are all left scrambling for safety. Karen, please tell us about Beneath Dark Waters.
Well, Beneath Dark Waters, and this is actually the UK cover. I just moved from Florida to the West Coast, and my US cover is in a box somewhere. And I was scrambling to find it today, and oh well. But it's the second in my New Orleans series, and I chose New Orleans because I thought it would be such a fun place to research. And I kept thinking all the research trips, and then the pandemic hit. So I did a lot of my research from notes I'd taken on previous trips. My husband learned to cook, Cajun food. So we tried to get into the mood. But it's the second of my New Orleans series, and they're standalone, but people do prefer to read them in order because you meet other characters from previous books. The crime is set around 4 brothers, and they are the Gates brothers. There's the 2 older ones, Aaron and Corey. And Aaron has just committed murder on video, and he is in prison. The 2 younger brothers are Jace and Rick, and they're 15 and 16 years old. So there's a big age gap in between these brothers. And Aaron is being prosecuted by Kai Cardozo, who is the assistant district attorney for Orleans Parish. out in New Orleans. And so Rick, being a 16-year-old kid, and desperate to get Aaron out of prison for his own reasons, decides that he's going to try to kidnap Kai's son. And that's the prologue. That's what kicks the story off. Jace is the youngest, and he is, unfortunately, he's kind of like, the little ship in the big ship's wake, and he kind of gets drawn into all of this. So the story brings in Kai, the hero, because his son has been threatened, and Val, who works for the investigative and security agency that this book centered, the series centers around. So Val becomes Elijah's bodyguard. Elijah is a little boy, and it's almost a comparison or juxtaposition between the two children. Elijah's little for his age. He's really smart. Jace is big for his age. Everybody thinks he's an adult. He's only 15, and he has dyslexia. He can't read, and everyone tells him he's stupid. And so it's these two children scrambling for safety is really at the core of this book. And so that is Beneath Dark Waters.
And they both have a very strong moral compass, I would say, those kids. Like that was
But
something
both children, yeah. And there are good cops and bad cops. And New Orleans is an interesting city because it does have a history of corruption. Many cities do, but New Orleans has gained headlines for theirs. And so there's just a lot to do in New Orleans, just as a destination city. I mean, it has, has the food, it has the music, it has all the culture. And so just kind of weaving all of that into this book was a lot of fun.
Speaking of food, Val, the bodyguard and ex-Marine, is it? What's her law enforcement?
She is a retired Marine, yes.
Yeah. Retired Marine, sorry. Anyway, drinks an amazing concoction. Can y'all see it? It's like a creamy, chocolatey, and there is an Oreo on the side of this glass. But just in case that wasn't enough for you, because it wasn't for me, there's also a cupcake with marshmallow.
Did you make them?
No, I didn't make them, Karen, you lovely person. No, I didn't make them.
My husband's recipe. He likes it when my characters need recipes. And they're all on the website too.
Yes, I do invite all our attendees today to go to the website. Absolutely. You will find a holiday's worth of snacky, fun drink, mixology fun there. Now, I am thrilled to get to welcome our own rogue, Lisa Black, with her latest release. Lisa, I'm not seeing your picture yet, but I'm going to go right ahead. Yeah, there you are.
I'm here.
Rogue Lisa Black works as a latent print examiner for the City of Cape Coral, Florida Police Department. And she's also written 15 novels of suspense and multiple series, including this second installation in her latest series. She has been guest of honor at Killer Nashville, belongs to numerous writing organizations, and as a forensic specialist is a certified crime scene analyst, appearing as a consultant on Court TV and belonging to multiple professional organizations. What Harms You is the second Locard Institute thriller and leads off with the question, what happens when a serial killer goes to CSI school? The Locard Institute is a state-of-the-art forensic research center where experts from around the world confront and solve the world's most challenging crimes. When Dr. Ellie Carr arrives for her first day as instructor, colleague Dr. Barbara Wright is found dead within hours. Soon after, a young woman disappears, only to be found in a gruesome tableau. Although forensic traces are elusive, Ellie and Rachel are determined to find the bizarre link between the violent deaths. Lisa, please tell us about What Harms You.
Well, you just gave it a pretty good summary. So that's it. It's Ellie's first day on the job, and she's like super jazzed to have this position. And of course, things aren't going very well. So the Locard Institute is does 1/3 research into forensic topics. They do 1/3 training to law enforcement, and but anybody really who wants to attend the training. It's usually going to be law enforcement or medical personnel. And then 1/3 private cases, which can take them around the globe. And as a forensic specialist, I have like over 1,000 hours of continuing education, because what you learn in school, especially when I went to school, is the more general scientific principles. So a great deal of our job is continuing education. So I've been in a lot of these classes. I mean, everything from, courtroom testimony for the fingerprint examiner to, bloodstain pattern interpretation and, advanced ridgeology, all these things. And they're all pretty much similar, and anybody in the field, knows what it's like. You get a really eclectic mix of people at these classes. And, some are newbies. They've only been on the job, for 6 months to a year. And then you'll get homicide detectives who have been detectives for 30 years. And you'll get the people who just want to get out of town for free on the employer's dime. And which I admit is, a real attraction. And then you get like, the really gung-ho types, like Abby on NCIS, who just get really excited about this. So it's fun. It's fun meeting your colleagues. It's fun meeting people from other places and talking to people from other labs. But it's, you need to learn too. So sometimes they can be, stressful.
Sounds like a good atmosphere for a thriller, because you throw a couple of crimes into the mix and, you're definitely going to have mayhem. So I kind of want to go down the line. I hinted at this when I was introducing Sujata. All of the books, and I've just seen Barbie like everybody else on the planet. So all of the books are, everything's coming through that lens. But all of the books really do have this very, strong element of female empowerment. And, whether it's Lisa's like, here's the Locard Institute and women are in charge, or Sujata and women are, fighting for power and having unusual methods of power, approaches to power in a society that really suppresses that, or Karen's, where you just really do have this kick ass. I mean, I wish everybody could read that first scene and see the aunt and then the rest of the book. And then Richard, who touched on this himself and how important it was that it was going to be this kind of hyper intelligent woman who's being gaslit and being compromised. So I would love each author, and we'll just go down in the same direction, to sort of speak to that element of, I don't know, gender or in their novels. Sujata, can we start with you? And I'll just be drinking merrily while you guys talk.
Yeah, I was thinking too. I was just about to say, do I have to go first? But let's see. So one thing I noticed, with my series and what I've learned about history, history of this time, is that to get ahead, for my character to have actually been a lawyer, when I looked at there were 2 women who were lawyers in early 20th century India. And one of them, in fact, did a lot of work where she was advocating for women who were in seclusion. Some of them were being poisoned by their relatives for trying to get their estate, and there were situations of abuse. So, but in order to get into that situation, you really needed your father or your husband or your uncle to support you and push you through. And it was the same for medicine. When I looked into the history of early women doctors, it was the same thing. So it actually would have been totally impossible to have this if you didn't have some men that were part of the process of change. And you got to think, well, why did these guys believe in their daughters like that? What was different about them? And on a purely cynical point of view, one reason that some members of this religious minority community, the Parsis, allow their daughters to, get university degrees and go into the professional fields is it put them in a state where they were admired by the British rulers. So that they were like, oh, this family is so progressive.
Yeah.
This particular man is against marriage, child marriage. So he gained status. So some people gained status from women doing these renegade jobs. And in most cases, that when women just, did become a lawyer or did become a doctor, it was actually a family choice. It wasn't, it was a parent's choice. So, that's kind of like the dark side when people say to me, is it realistic that a woman could have been a lawyer? It's like, yeah, if she had a really awesome father.
Right. Or even not, maybe just a calculating father who really, I mean, as you were
Exactly.
saying.
Yeah, that's what, that like somebody who's on that track. And also, if you were going to practice law, you would have to have a family firm that was willing to hire you.
Right.
Because it was very, very difficult to for anybody would want to hire the woman.
Interesting. Because in the opening pages, you sort of see how Praveen is, I thought, taken seriously and granted respect, but now you're making it sound as if there's sort of a dark underside to that.
There can be. I mean, I think that I like to write characters that are complex and that they do things you like and they do things you don't like. And, that's part of being human. And our protagonists, I'm sure a lot of other people on this panel would do things with their protagonists that aren't so attractive.
Well, so let's hear about them. Richard, let's move on down and tell us about Sarah, who's in a fine pickle and is a very, highly intelligent and lauded person.
Yeah, I mean, I was interested in, what brings two people together in their early courtship was this scientific brilliance that both characters had. Daniel was attracted to Sarah's extraordinary brain, but as they've matured together, her success has sort of outshadowed his, and she's gone on to win a Nobel Prize. And he's celebrated her success, but somewhere in him there's been this sort of kind of eating away inside, that he's been unable to sort of handle the fact that his wife is more successful than he is. And it's sort of manifested itself in him sort of sabotaging her by sort of destroying her in a way, because he's drawn to he's trying to better himself by sort of bringing her down. And it was partly to do with relationships that I've observed in other people, and what happens when that is the case for a man. And it was controversial, I suppose, to make Daniel sort of flawed and weak, but I didn't for one second think that was a problem. I think I think this happens. I think it's very difficult for men to sort of live in the shadow of a much more successful woman. I just was playing around with that idea.
Yeah, I think there's probably some writing couples that that can speak to that as well. And yeah, that's fascinating. So, okay, moving on down the line, Karen. I mean, Val obviously, is a very strong character. You've got, some wonderful characters on, all throughout, Kai as well. But tell us a little about the sort of, I don't know, for lack of a better phrase, female empowerment dimension, which I think is a big factor in suspense fiction and romantic.
It is, and I think it's a reason that a lot of women like to read thrillers is to see that kind of empowerment. I have known marriages like Richard talked about, where the woman is overshadowed by the husband who can't deal with the success. And I count myself lucky every day that I have a husband who he's just as pleased as punch, when the books sell and all of that. And I think I was very lucky growing up. My dad always told me I could do anything. Now, physically, I'm not going to be able to do anything, but from a educational, the career standpoint, I could do anything. And it always surprised me later when I met people who hadn't been that lucky, who hadn't been that gift, hadn't had that gift. And I think writing women who are empowered, whether they were raised to be empowered or they grabbed it themselves. And, I think Beneath Dark Waters is my 29th book. And I think out of, and they all have these heroines that are strong in their own way. And sometimes they're physically strong, like Val. I mean, Val she was in the Marine Corps. She has been a school teacher. That's her profession before she returned to New Orleans and joined this investigative firm because she could make a lot more money. And having been a school teacher, I can attest that that's true. But yeah, she's physically strong. And she doesn't have to be, they don't have to be physically strong. They can be, they can be emotionally strong. They can have integrity. And I think being fortunate enough to have written so many heroines, that are strong, it's been nice to be able to pick different characteristics that set them apart and make them unique. But Val is physically strong. She's also very smart, and she's got a lot going for her. She's also in a bad place in her life, and that's kind of where she and Kai get together, and he helps soften some of the rough edges from some of the loss that she's had recently. So they bolster each other. So I think that's also that's important in the story, is that, no character, no person is an island. Val is strong, but she needs the people around her to make her even stronger.
Yeah, and that's sort of what romantic suspense teaches us, right? With each book. I love that.
They both have to be in it.
No, go ahead. Yeah, you were going to say.
Well, they have a quality of romantic suspense is that the hero and the heroine have to be both significantly entrenched in the story all the way to the end. And when they bring down the bad guy or bad guys, it's together. And it may not be physically together in the same space, but they both carry equal responsibility in bringing the bad guys down.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so there has to be a balance there. And yeah, that's very interesting. So Lisa, same question for you. I forgot to say that Lisa's drink, I'm combining it, is a chocolate martini, and I've just been sipping it all show long. So, well, Lisa, talk to us. I mean, certainly Ellie and Rachel, I mean, I think you've always written very strong female characters, but certainly in this series, there's that intellectual component. And yeah, talk to us about the same kind of themes.
Well, I think it just happens naturally because, of course, you want your main character to be strong and intelligent. It has to be somebody that people can get behind, even though they have flaws. They have issues and problems in their life. Everybody's going to, but that just makes them more realistic rather than weak. I just couldn't. I personally kind of lose, at least on television, I lose a little patience with characters who are just hot messes. That's okay if they've completely gotten themselves together by the end. But if they're just always a hot mess, I'm like, yeah, sorry for you, hon, but I don't really want to hang out with you. So yes, in this case, because I have two female characters, their strengths and weaknesses kind of need to balance each other. So, Ellie, even though this isn't me at all, she was an FBI agent, so she can do like the physical daring do kind of thing. And she's, used to, like in the one I'm working on right now, she's going to go undercover a little bit, and she can do that, whereas it would completely freak me out, But Rachel, her background has been a little more stable than Ellie's, and she's, a little older, and she's got a lot of training in various areas. She was a former pathologist, whereas Ellie was a former FBI agent with a lot of training. She's got a PhD in forensics, whereas Rachel's PhD is actually in, or MD is actually in medicine. So they have to complement each other's strengths, and that's a little bit of a challenge, finding ways to make that work.
Yeah, that's sort of a similarity to what Karen is saying, maybe without the romance factor, but the balance and the complementing each other. So I'm going to ask one more question down the line, and then I'm going to ask each of our authors who is willing to read a short excerpt. So if you get nervous about, Richard's probably nervous about reading his excerpt. That's just the way it goes. You can be prepared. I will ask you after this. But one of the things that I think our listeners are really interested in is, how people come to be authors and the professional background. And each of you happens to have a very interesting one. So Sujata, we're starting with you again. You, first of all, got a writing degree, which I'm always very interested in, how you feel the educational background sort of translates into being a fiction writer, but also you were a journalist. And we do see novelists who come over from journalism. I just love to hear you talk a little bit about your professional experience and how it pertains to your writing career and this book in particular.
Yeah, that's a great question. I do have I don't even know whether I can really call it a writing degree because it's a Bachelor of Arts in something called writing seminars. So it was a major where you did lots and lots of creative writing classes and you workshopped each other's material. And there was a huge variety of skill level in the class. So it wasn't like you were with, this really curated little group of people. There might be a lacrosse player in the class that was looking for a way to fulfill his humanity requirements. So you never knew what you would get, but there were some pretty cool teachers and we got to do a lot of different kinds of writing. And I really didn't think that I would become a novelist for a long, long, long time based on my experience in that class and what the life plan for writers that I was hearing about was you're going to write a lot of short stories and you're going to try to get them published in little magazines. And I realized, okay, I have to support myself. So I became a journalist, but I liked that quite a bit. I love that job. I love the camaraderie of being with other writers and the adventure, going to different parts of the city. The deadline pressure, like I don't like deadline pressure now, but we're talking about writing a 20-inch story, which that translates into like 400 words or something. I don't know, 500 words. It's actually not that bad, except it has to be true. Everything has to be true. So that's the hard part about that.
Yeah, the deadline. I've heard Laura Lippman talk about, how I think she wrote for the Baltimore Sun too, maybe.
Yeah, we were friends, actually. We are friends. We are still friends.
Yeah, that's neat. But just that deadline thing that it's certainly, you're not going to complain about. Can you have the novel done in 6 months? And it's longer than 20 inches. Fascinating. Okay, Richard. So I don't know. We writers, I think, often talk about the other side of the pond, not in the British sense, but in the Hollywood or the New York or the movie sense, but the London stage sense, all of that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how one translates to the other, or maybe it doesn't, how the two businesses compare and contrast, or anything you'd like to talk about.
It's interesting, listening to everybody else's way into storytelling, because for me, that's what it always was. As early as I can remember, I was an avid reader and I sort of lived in the books in my imagination. And I think it's where I realized I was an actor. So my way into authoring is really from the inside out, from imagining myself as character and developing character and seeing writers and producers develop character for long form television and also for theatre, and seeing that kind of emotional exchange when you're standing on stage, telling a story through the actual eyes, voice, and body of the person that's in the story, the living manifestation of a character, which I have taken for granted, I think, when it came to writing. But in answer to your question about the differences between the British and the American, North American, whatever, I think we've always had a respect for the author, and certainly in terms of theatre and TV, that you don't change a single word, a single sentence, a single comma. You don't improvise these words. There's a slight difference. There's a slight more kind of respect for certainly TV writers and staff writers. You give them, like I'm developing projects at the moment and I've got a writer on board who's quite new to the game, and I want to make adjustments, but I have to let her do it. It's which I appreciate, because we've all got to be able to sort of find our way through. But I believe everybody everybody is a writer. Everyone has a story somewhere in their head. It's just finding a way to tell it, really.
Yeah, I think I believe the same. I mean, everybody does have a story to tell, right?
Many.
Right, right. Very interesting. So Karen, your background, school teacher, am I right? And I can imagine that feeding in, but I'd like to hear your take on it.
Oh, I actually started writing when I was an engineer. My degree is in chemical
Engineer and
engineering.
school. Okay, I missed that. Then tell us about both your backgrounds.
I was an engineer for Procter and Gamble. They make Tide and baby diapers and, and everything. And I traveled. My job was global quality assurance, and I would travel the world. And this was in the 90s. And so I started writing around 93 or so. And I started writing because all the traveling I did, there wasn't enough room for enough books in my luggage, and ebooks weren't a thing then. If you and when I got to these other countries, and a lot of them were non-English speaking countries, I'd go to the one English bookstore and I'd already read all those books. So I was in my hotel room, couldn't speak the language, couldn't watch the TV. So I started writing my own stories, and that's how I got started. I told this story once, and a lady said, I just would have gone to the bar. And, in the hotel, I was like, I never even considered it, because I like by myself. No, thank you. So that's how I got started writing. And for about 5 years, this was just a hobby. And I think that was a good thing for me, because it allowed me to kind of learn the ropes and learn how I was writing. And they say, find your voice. And I did that without the pressure of being published, because it was just a hobby. I was the only one who knew that. My husband knew. I had like 2 friends who knew. Nobody else knew. And then about 5 years into it, my husband comes home, and he'd been to the used bookstore with the kids. He would take them he would take them out on Saturday afternoons and let me write. He give me quiet time to write, my hobby. And he came home with this book, and it says How to Publish Your Novel. It cost 25 cents. I still have it. And it was a step-by-step. And being the engineer I made a flow chart, I made spreadsheets, I did everything it said. Got some great rejections. And I was done. And he's like, no, you have to do something with all this book that you've been writing. So it was my husband who really pushed me into it. And so I did all the, this was back way before the internet. The internet was there. It just wasn't very developed. So this was when, you actually had to send query letters and things like that. And I got an agent, and a couple of years later, I sold my first book, and that came out in 2003. So I left engineering because at the time my husband was a mental health therapist, and was nearly killed on his job by a very bad client. So who threatened him and our children. And so we actually moved away from Ohio, where I worked at the time. I got another job. I ended up getting laid off right after 9/11. And that's when I became a school teacher. So the writing had been going on for some time. So I was a school teacher for about 5 years, and then I was making enough writing so that I could quit. So that's what I did.
Which is a huge accomplishment, and how amazing. So you sort of primed the pump, up until 9/11. And then even though it didn't immediately take, you had a runway, you were a running start. And
actually, I had sold my first book prior to that.
Oh, you did?
I think I sold my first book. No, it was just after 9/11. It was like 3 months later.
Okay.
I sold my first
came
book.
out.
And then, then it was just kind of.
Yeah. And I remember the days you're talking about, by the way, with SASCs and all that. So the rejections and the stamp, self-addressed stamp.
I look over them every now and again and laugh, but
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So Lisa, you have a fascinating job. I mean, I'm lucky enough to get to be a rogue with Lisa. And so every now and then, I'll need something from her, but she'll be like kneeling at the curb, like scraping or doing something I can only imagine. I want to know, Lisa, first of all, I mean, I can imagine how your writing is influenced by your professional day job, but also how you balance the two. Like that's always been a big source of admiration for me. So tell us about your professional background.
Oh, well, that's not too hard actually, because I work a rotating shift. I'm like on 2 days, off 2 days. I work every other weekend, which I don't mind at all. So that part is actually easy. Um, and I don't have children, so
Jesus.
that frees up a lot of time. How I got into writing was voracious reader, like everyone else. My first degree was in political, it's a long story, but my first degree was in political science because I loved architecture in Washington, D.C., not what people actually did. So I graduated with a degree in political science, no marketable skills whatsoever except typing, became a secretary for 10 years. I was personnel secretary. And I was sitting in front of a word processor all day. So I thought, well, what the heck, I'll write a novel. How hard can it be? I was also like a 10-minute walk from the downtown branch of the Cleveland Public Library. And I had a 1 hour each way bus commute every day. So I read a lot, started writing, then, didn't get anywhere. I got some nice rejections. Then after 10 years, I decided, well, this isn't working. So I went back to school, got the degree in biology, went to work at the coroner's office. So I didn't have any time to write at all. I was just too exhausted. So then that was my dream job. I absolutely loved it there. And after 4 or 5 years only, my husband dragged me 1,400 miles to Florida because he didn't like Cleveland weather, even though he grew up there just like me. I'm really envious of Karen. I'm envious of your husband being so supportive. It's like mine tolerates what I do, but not, that's about as enthusiastic as he gets. Except for the few times when I've gotten really big checks far in the past. He was enthusiastic about those. So anyway, then suddenly I'm in Florida. I've got no job, no friends, no family. I started writing again just to stay sane. And since I now had the forensic background, and I always only wanted to write mysteries, that's the only other thing I was ever interested in, it just made sense to apply the forensic background to telling the mystery story. And in the meantime, a little show called CSI had premiered.
Yeah.
So the stars aligned. And my first novel published under my maiden name, Elizabeth Becca, was called Trace Evidence. It was actually my 9th full-length novel. And I got my agent through a query letter. I didn't have an in with her. She didn't know me from Adam. I was just another query letter that showed up on her desk.
A lot of writers have those drawer novels in them, and yeah. Well, it's a wonderful story. I would love, and I think all our listeners would love to hear from each of these fantastic new books. So I think we'll just keep going down the line. And if Sujata, you would be willing to read us an excerpt from The Mistress of Batya House, that would be wonderful.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So I'm going to start a chapter that's kind of close to the beginning, and Perveen is the protagonist, the young woman lawyer, and she's gone to work. Collecting a bail refund was the perfect errand for a law clerk, which mystery law lacked. When Perveen had started working with her father, his clerk of 20 years had resigned because he disliked taking orders from a woman. The 2 gentlemen who'd followed had been sacked due to what Jamshedji called ineptitude and what Perveen judged to be variations of the same prejudice against female bosses. Thus, the bail errand fell to Perveen, but at least she was headed to a new police station that was an improvement over most in the city. Gamdevi was built of handsome gray stone bricks in the Adams style. Inside, a sweeping staircase led to various administrative rooms. She felt uplifted treading these stairs alongside others in the field, barristers, solicitors, clerks, and police. She was usually the only female doing business at Gamdevi, but a level of professional decorum existed that made her feel comfortable. Up in the bail office, Perveen produced the papers proving that their client, a rice merchant accused of profiteering, had presented himself to court a week earlier. The judge had dismissed the case as having insufficient evidence, something Perveen credited both to her research at the rice market and the efforts of Mr. Vivek Sharma, a barrister and independence activist she first met within a small circle of lawyers supporting Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Mr. Sharma's education had been completed 10 years earlier at the government law school in Bombay, giving him old boy connections crisscrossing all aspects of law. She thought well of him for his memory, reliability, and his open-mindedness. The bail refund was returned to Perveen. After she placed the cash in an envelope inside her legal briefcase, she proceeded downstairs, thinking about other errands that could fill the afternoon. But Armand and the Daimler were gone. Their space in front of the station was occupied by several horse-drawn police carts. No doubt the police had forced him to move, and she resolved to look for him. But before she could walk along the pavement, she paused to allow space for the prisoners emerging from one of the police carts. Most of the chained men wore the rough clothes of manual laborers, while others were half naked, wearing rags that marked destitution. Then she noticed the unexpected, a young woman chained to the end of the group. The female prisoner appeared to be in her early 20s, with a fuzzy long braid that looked slept on. She had a slender figure covered with a beige sari, overlaid with a coat of dust and dirt. As she studied the woman's profile, Perveen thought she looked strangely familiar. She'd seen those high cheekbones and luminous, wide-set eyes before. Who was this young woman?
Good cliffhanger. Thank you. So, Richard, would you please read us an excerpt from Geneva?
Yes, I will. So this is a scene where character of Sarah is being drugged by her husband and she's being interviewed, but the interviewer is trying to get something out of her that she doesn't want to reveal. Story of my life. Terry remains still, but her image appears to waver in the distance. I puff my cheeks out from the heat of the fire. My face is burning, yet I'm cold. The discussion continues, a regurgitated cut and paste of other interviews, Googled and rephrased. No follow-ups. Each question just posed one after the other, like she's not even listening, just ticking boxes. Her silhouetted shape across the room moves in and out of focus, undulating like a snake. A distant voice, then two voices in conversation, speaking simultaneously, overlapping, discordant and jumbled. Then her voice is suddenly loud and clear as a bell. Is your diagnosis what caused you to black out at the Schiller Institute last night? My eyes snap open. I'm sorry? I sit up in my seat. Are you okay? Her voice is distant but soft. We can leave things there if you're not feeling well. She stops the tape. I open my mouth to speak, but no thoughts are in my head. No words form. My mouth is open and I can feel saliva trickling onto my lower lip. She stands to leave, pausing at the door as she slides her phone into her bag. It really was an honor, thank you. You've given me everything I need. The room tilts slowly, the floor lurching up sideways to become a wall, yet the crystal glasses on the table remain still. The pictures on the walls don't move. Terry stands in the doorway, frozen. I need help, but she just turns and walks slowly away. I black out.
That would be a terrifying experience. Thank you, Richard. Karen, can we go on to you? And would you please read us from Beneath Dark Waters?
Yes, let's see. This is the scene in the prologue where Jace has just learned that his brother Rick is intending to kidnap this little boy. Shut up, Rick hissed. He shoved something black and soft into Jace's hand. Jace stared at it, a ski mask, just like the one Rick was pulling over his own head. Put it on, Rick ordered, now. And then Rick pulled a gun from the waistband of his jeans. Jace gaped. What the fuck? Stop the van. Wild-eyed, Rick grabbed at Jace's arm, making him jerk the steering wheel to one side. The van veered into the curb. Put it on if you don't want to live in prison with Aaron. I mean it, Jace, and now. Stunned into obedience, Jace pulled the ski mask over his head as Rick yanked the passenger side door open, jumped out of the van. The kid on the sidewalk stopped abruptly, turning to look up at the pregnant woman. She looked around with a frown. Don't hurt her. She's pregnant. Please don't hurt her. Dazed, Jace watched as Rick, still holding the gun in one hand, ran up to the pair and grabbed the boy, shoving him under the arm like a football. He'd made it 2 steps when everything went to shit. Rick screamed and dropped to the ground a second before a siren began to wail. Jace looked around, trying to figure out what had happened. Fuck. I have to get out of here. Drive, leave him. But Jace couldn't do that. Rick was his brother. He'd leave you in a heartbeat. True. But if Jace left Rick and the cops picked him up, 2 of his brothers would be behind bars and Corey would be even madder. Jace couldn't make Corey madder. He just couldn't. Making his decision, he burst from the driver's seat and rounded the van. By the time he got to the curb, the kid had rolled out from under Rick's arm and was kneeling on the sidewalk, visibly trembling and holding Rick's ski mask in his small hand. Shit. Rick's face was out there for all the world to see. Corey's going to kill us. Run, Elijah, run, the woman shouted. She grabbed at the boy's shoulder, yanking him to his feet, and Jace glimpsed the weapon in her hand, the stun gun. She tased Rick. The woman took off running faster than Jace thought a pregnant woman could run. Elijah, come on, she screamed, but the boy was frozen in place, staring down at Rick. Jace rushed to where Rick lay, and the little boy slowly looked up at him, eyes wide, looking every bit as shocked as Jace felt. Elijah, the pregnant woman shouted from the doorway of a laundromat. The look of horror on her face made Jace think that she thought the little boy was behind her. She'd started to run back toward them, but slipped and fell back into the laundromat with another scream. Jace could grab the kid. He could do it, but he couldn't do it. It's wrong. Meeting the boy's terrified eyes, he made another decision. Run, he snapped. I said, run. It was when the kid finally started to run that Jace realized people were beginning to gather, to stare, to take video. Things had just gone from bad to worse. Rick was still on the ground, twitching and moaning. The smell of urine was thick. He was going to be so mad. Don't think about that. Just move. Jace hauled his brother onto his shoulder in a fireman's carry, grateful that Rick was the smaller of the 2 of them. Jace threw him in the van, closed the side door, and ran to the driver's side, revving the engine as he made their escape. What have I done? Rick was going to be pissed off. Jace had let the kid go. No, he'd made the kid go. Jace shuddered at what Corey was going to do to them. Don't think about that. Just drive.
I love that kid. Thank you, Karen. Okay, Lisa, and then I see we have lots and lots of questions, so I'm hoping we have time for some of those. But Lisa, would you please read to us from What Harms You?
Okay, I'm just kind of randomly picking a spot in the 2nd chapter where, as we know, it's Ellie Carr's first day. And she stepped into the classroom that she's taking over the class for her predecessor, Dr. Barbara Wright, who has, she's also going to be moving into Barbara's office, but Barbara left the door locked. So Ellie had spied a boxy chunk of lab equipment about the size of a dorm fridge on a rear counter. The flap on its lower left front gaped open, allowing a peek into the wires and tubes inside. This must be the rapid DNA analyzer. It looks like they built their own. It's been around for years, but I've never been up close and personal. This is amazing. Rapid DNA analysis was exactly what it sounded like, a fully automated process from a swab to CODIS-ready genetic profile without the need for human beings to provide additional reagents, tubes, or heaters during analysis. First designed for use on the battlefield to identify soldiers killed in action, the technology quickly migrated to forensic use. Yeah, Caleb said. She said something about this being the working model that they used for experiments and classroom instruction only. There's a later model that they use for client work. I wonder if they're going to go for a patent. Got to be big money in that. Man, it stinks in here. Ellie tore herself away from images of what might be going on inside the device. She'd better get Caleb back in his seat before Barbara started up again, or the woman might superglue their office door lock as a goodbye gift. But the fumes were strong, tickling her nose with an acrid feel, and something stronger to her left than her right. She turned. A thin bar of light showed past the bottom of a door on the west wall. The door had no identifier, but she assumed it to be some sort of closet. Classrooms weren't normally designed with adjoining doors to the next space. Had something spilled? The knob had a key slot, but moved easily when she turned it. Pulling the door open brought with it a wave of choking, stinging air, along with the sight of a person stretched out on the floor, face down. But from the tight bun of hair and the perfectly shaped nails, Ellie immediately recognized Barbara Wright. The supply closet measured about 5 by 6 feet, with shelving on all 3 walls. The shelves had been filled with the usual accoutrements. Gloves, microtubes, and disposable aprons lined half the shelf, and bottles and jars, most of the brown glass type, stood along the rest. Barbara stretched out on the available floor space with her feet just inside the door, her weight resting partially on her right side, left hand up by her chest. Ellie saw broken pieces of glass near Barbara's hand, one with a partial label. She moved forward, but Caleb grabbed her shoulders from behind. Stop, it's too thick. You'd better stay back or you'll pass out too. Ellie shrugged him off. The fumes were uncomfortable, but she could breathe without choking. But to be sure, she put a hand in her blazer pocket, clapped the material over her nose and mouth. The 2 pens in her pocket banged against her nose, but it relieved the stinging sensation in the nasal cavity. She couldn't do much about her eyes except keep them at half-mast. She moved Barbara onto her back and then felt her carotid for any sign of a heartbeat. She didn't find one, only a burning as the spilled acid singed her fingertips. Liquid had formed a puddle under Barbara's face and up her shoulders. It left angry red patches and turned her shirt collar to a limp, goopy mess. Without thinking, Ellie reached out her hand to wipe her burning fingers on Barbara's left shoulder, which had stayed well above the puddle. Then, instead of altering the death scene any more than she already had, she wiped them on her shoe. The Skechers were worn anyway. All of this took mere seconds before she turned her face to the attendee, Caleb. Call 911. Tell them I believe she's deceased. She's dead? He spoke calmly. The attendees were, after all, crime scene investigators, and with the sheriff's office, he'd probably been up close with more dead people than Ellie had. But it had to be a little disconcerting for the victim to be someone you were taking notes from only a few hours before. There's no pulse and the eyes are open and fixed. Body temp is already cooled. Call 911 and then we'll have to find Rachel or the director. You go, he said kindly. I can stay with the body. No, we better both go. The fumes are strong. And I don't want to add further medical claims to the low cards problems, she thought. Not a good way to impress on my first day at the job. She left the supply room door open, but made sure the classroom door would lock behind her as they exited. That would keep out the attendees. Surely they were only given access to the building itself and not all doors within. However, she guessed that most, if not all, of the staff could get in. She'd have to hustle if she wanted to protect her new coworkers from both the unhappy site and the toxic club that came with it. She headed for the south corner stairwell, which led down to the cafeteria, breaking into a trot. The guy from Missouri kept pace beside her.
You made a very, very gruesome scene where acid turns things to goop actually made me smile wryly a couple of times. So thank you, Lisa. All right, as usual with Rogue Reads, we come to the end where I think the show is barely over. I am so grateful to Richard Armitage and Sujata Massey and Lisa Black and Karen Rose for joining us. I do want to get to some audience questions. I hope we can stick around for some of those. And I also hope that all the listeners will be sure to tune in for Rogue Reads next month. Our October show has a brilliant lineup. I will tell you just one sneak peek, and we're going to welcome the legendary John Connolly. And now let us turn for some questions. Chris, do you want to kind of call out a few randomly, or how would you like to do this?
Sure. I actually gathered them because I was like, oh my heavens, there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
There are some for everyone, and there are quite a few for Richard. I am going to combine some of them because some of them are similar. One of the questions was, how did you come up with Alzheimer's and dementia, seeing it's such a complex situation? And do you have a personal connection to that, or is it just for the plot's sake of the book you had in mind?
No, I have two friends whose parents have been suffering from dementia. One of them's no longer here, and I didn't go in too strong on that. I just spent a lot of time listening and hearing the anecdotes that they were telling me about their loved ones, and I just thought it was a terrifying condition to not be able to trust your own mind, particularly in a younger person. So that was one of the reasons that I chose Alzheimer's.
Okay, great. And then another question for one of your characters, Geneva, was his love of skiing the reason you chose? Was your love of skiing the reason you chose Geneva for your?
Of course he did.
It was, yes, it was one of the reasons why I'd been to Geneva, but also there's a scene in the story where Daniel has a really quite bad skiing accident, which is based on a true event in my own life. So yeah, I used that.
And are you doing a sequel to that story?
I'm writing a second book at the moment, which is not related, but I did write a treatment for a second book because I'm just not finished with my central character of Sarah. I wanted to see her in a more on a more solid foundation, in control and in kind of her power in a way. So yeah, I've got plans to write a second book.
And I have one last question just for you, and then I'm going to move to everyone. Okay. Did any of the characters you play in so many of the shows and movies inspire plots for you and in your books?
Yeah, all of them in a way. I can see which projects I was working on at different times in the book. I was filming Stay Close when I started, and I was filming Obsession when I was doing the final edits. And I feel like there's little kind of capillaries that flow between all of the characters, just things rub off on you, and I just let it into the writing. I think, you know, once your creative floodgates are open, you've got to let it live.
Great. Okay, thanks. So then for all of the authors, people want to know, on a lighter note, how many cups of coffee or tea are needed, or how long would you say you work on average on your current books? And who pushes you to keep going? Is it just your love of the writing, or is there actually something like a deadline, or I mean, a deadline inspires me at times, but what's your biggest inspiration?
In a minute.
Why don't we go down the line the way we did it? Sujata, we'll start with you with that question, and then we'll go to Richard and Karen and Lisa.
Yeah, well, I've learned that it's hard for me to produce a whole lot in a period. Like I used to do things like mark off, oh, I'm going to write for 2 hours, or I'm going to write for 3 hours. So now what I do is I write in shorter amounts, but I keep coming back throughout the day. So I might sit down and work 3 or 4 times a day, which is something I didn't do before, but that way I don't feel frustrated and I'm always ready to keep moving forward. And I think for me, it's important not to get hung up on perfection and trying to rewrite the beginning of the book over and over and incorporating every little new idea I have. So just a little bit of self-control is what keeps me going.
And quieting the inner editor.
Mm-hmm.
Karen?
Karen or Richard?
Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm going out
Karen.
of order. I'm
enough.
sorry, I'm out of order.
Go ahead.
Okay. I laughed when you said chocolate. I mean, coffee or tea. I binge Diet Cokes when I'm writing, and I have to really be careful because I can go through an awful lot of Diet Cokes. I binge write, and I write at night. So usually I'll get started around 10 o'clock at night. I'll write all the way until dawn, sometimes until like noon the next day, fall into bed, sleep, get up and do it again until the book is done. So that's not the healthy way to do it. I don't recommend any of you do it, but I think that was born from writing when the kids went to bed, because it was my hobby. And I just got into the habit of writing at night. So that's what I do now. I tried to be a good author and write during the daytime like all my other friends did, but it didn't work. So now I don't even bother to start until 10 p.m. because I know that's when the brain comes on.
Whatever works. Lisa?
Okay, Richard. No,
either or. I definitely want to hear Richard's answers.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, I have electric kettles that I just throw a tea bag. It's horrible the way I make tea, but I just throw a tea bag in there and I will literally go through 2 of those at least a day, every day. But it's been so hectic lately that I've gone back to coffee, but just like 1 or 2 cups during the day. So I'm obsessed with word count. It's like once I start a book, I decide on a word count schedule. It could be 1,000 or 2,000 words a day, varying depending on whether it's a work day or not. I prefer to do it first thing in the morning to get it done, because I don't know if I'm slightly OCD or whatever, but it's like once I start a book, I just want to get it done. So I'm not one of those authors that just loves to write. And I'm one of those authors that likes having written more than I actually like writing. And it's not that I don't like it, it's that I find it nerve-wracking. So once I'm done for the, once I've hit my goal for the day, I can feel like I can relax and move on.
So Richard, as a debut, I don't know, is your process going to change, or what got you Geneva on the page?
Like many of the authors I've met over the last few months, and everybody here as well, I have a day job. So I've written on red-eye flights. I've written in hotel rooms in Spain and Madrid when I was on location. I've written in the back of a car. I've written in a Winnebago when I'm waiting to film. But and on a Sunday as well, I'd use my Sunday morning. But I agree about that witching hour. I love writing late because it's like the world goes quiet and everything comes alive. But I love that thing where you just start and then you look at your watch and sort of 6 or 7 hours has passed and you've just disappeared somewhere. I think it's one of the best feelings in the world.
So here's a follow-up question on that order. Are you guys, just very quickly, do you plot or do you just write stream of conscious and put it on the page?
Oh, this is a good one. We'll wrap up with this one because that's so good for each author. Let's just go right down the line. Sujata?
Yeah, I have a synopsis. I always have to have that in order to convince my publisher to let me write the book. But once I get going with that synopsis, all kinds of things change. So, but if I get confused, I can always look back at the synopsis and say, oh, that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, coming from long form television where you see shows fall apart or them come together, I knew that I had to write a watertight outline from beginning to end, every chapter with a small sentence of what was going to happen and how, and that gives me the confidence that I can write over a long period of time. So that's the way I did it the first time.
Kind of a lost phenomenon of TV.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Winging it don't work.
Karen?
I plot at the beginning. I write until I've written myself off my outline. And then I go to the end and I write backwards. And I just like on Post-it notes, this has to happen. And for that to happen, this has to happen. And I work my way backwards. And then I put them all in order and then I finish the book.
Oh my gosh, Karen, you have the most fascinating process I've ever heard.
Yeah. Yeah,
It panics me, but it works.
Yeah.
That is very unusual. Yes. I'm definitely a plotter. I have to know before I start, I know how it's going to start, how it's going to end, all the major things that are going to happen in between, who the killer is, who they're going to kill and why, and most of the major clues that are going to, and until I have that, I don't really start. But I always say I'm going to do the really nice, incredibly detailed outline, and I'm actually getting farther away from that. I will just jot down like the loosest kind of scribbled on a piece of paper outline you've ever seen, and that's about it. And then I usually don't look at it again because it's all in my head.
You have a very sane process. You're very rational, Lisa. I don't think you're OCD.
Well, thank you. I'm going to turn it back to Jenny then, since we're not going to ask any more questions. And thank you all for being with us. Really, the Rogues appreciate you.
We appreciate you, Chris. Thank you for the expert tech guidance. And I know we didn't get to everybody's questions. We never do. I really, really would encourage each and every audience member to go out and buy these wonderful books, Geneva, The Mistress of Batya House, Beneath Dark Waters, and What Harms You. Get them all and then stay in touch with the authors. Follow them on social and get their newsletters, and maybe you'll even be able to ask a question that way. I know that 4 of our audience members will win a copy of each book, which is very exciting. You will be notified by email if you're a winner. Thank you so much to our wonderful authors, to Sujata Massey and Richard Armitage and Karen Rose and Lisa Black for joining us. The Rogue Women Writers are thrilled that we get to do this every month, and have a wonderful night, everybody.